Well, we have team coverage 1 year later after the January 6th insurrection at the nation's capital. Good Thursday evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Priscilla Casper. Sean has the night off. It was exactly 1 year ago today when supporters of former President Donald Trump stormed the Capitol building following the then president's rally outside the White House, where he cast doubt on the results of the 2020 presidential election. The supporters then breached the Capitol, chanting "Stop the Steal" shortly before things turned deadly. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says Trump should be ashamed for lying to Americans about voter fraud, but adds it is now time for the country to move forward. And tonight, a Southern Arizona congressman is remembering the attack 1 year later. News 4 Tucson sat down with Rahul Grijalva. News 4 Tucson's Eric Fink joins us live in downtown with that story tonight. Eric.
Priscilla, as Arizona's senior Democratic Congressman Rahul Grijalva recalls being on the House floor debating Arizona GOP Congressman Paul Gosar about the election outcome when Grijalva says you could hear the angry mob just feet away outside. Minutes later, insurrectionists breached the Capitol. Congressman Grijalva says that 1 year later, we are still dealing with the consequences of the attack on our democracy.
The images are seared into our memory. Southern Arizona Congressman Rahul Grijalva remembers how loud it was outside.
You could hear the fact that it was a large crowd, and it was an angry crowd. And then all hell broke loose.
A year ago, Grijalva had just recovered from COVID-19 as members of Congress rushed to evacuate.
I didn't have full energy, and I couldn't keep up with the pace of the other members as they ran to the safe zone. And this one Capitol Police woman got one of these chairs that you have in your office with wheels on it, sat me down, and rushed me all the way, and I will forever be grateful to her.
That day was not about a person. That day was not about a party. That day was about people. And there were many, many people that came that day because they were concerned.
Shelley Keiss is the chair of the Pima County Republican Party. She lived in the D.C. area for many years.
To see what took place at the Capitol was sad for everyone, because that is our people's house, and the destruction of our people's house at any level is wrong.
For all the political differences Congressman Grijalva and Keiss have, they agree. As we move forward, there's no greater task than preserving our democratic process.
We have to fight to keep the republic, and that should be number one in the hearts and minds of all Americans.
Here we are, and the thing that is under the most severe threat is our democracy, and I worry. The right to vote and the function of this democracy is more important than anything else that's on the table.
And several Arizonans took part in the insurrection. Some were arrested and charged. And for more on those individuals, let's bring in my colleague Lou Pizza Maria, who is back in studio with more on that. Good evening, Lupita.
Good evening. At least 12 Arizonans were criminally charged after storming the Capitol 1 year ago. Who are they? What is their legal standing today?
We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength.
Shortly after his speech, people took to the streets in Washington, D.C. and stormed
pillaging the U.S. Capitol.
These are the Arizonans we know are currently facing charges, have pled guilty, or have pending cases. Jacob Chansley, known as the face of the insurrection, pled guilty to obstructing Congress certification of the 2020 vote. He was sentenced to 41 months in prison. Tucsonans Felicia and Corey Connold, the brother and sister, face conspiracy, obstructing an official proceeding, entering a restricted building, and more. Documents claim Felicia bragged on social media about the influence she had on the day's events. Both cases are pending. Daniel Rodriguez moved to California from Arizona. He was charged with assault. He told the FBI he believed President Trump called him to Washington, D.C. that day. His case is ongoing. Micajah Jackson charged with knowingly entering or remaining in a restricted building without lawful authority, violent entry, and disorderly conduct. He took a plea and will learn his fate February 25th of this year. James McGrew arrested in Glendale after authorities recognized his King James stomach tattoo. He's charged with assaulting an officer, obstructing an official proceeding, act of physical violence in the Capitol ground or buildings, and more. A status conference is scheduled for January 28th. Nathan Intrican, wearing a gladiator-like costume, is charged with violent entry, disorderly conduct on Capitol grounds, and knowingly entered a restricted building. He has a plea agreement hearing on January 14th. Andrew Hatley, arrested in Eloy, sentenced to 36 months probation for demonstrating inside the Capitol. Tim Gionnet live-streamed video inside Nancy Pelosi's office. A status conference is scheduled for February 14th. Lisa Homer charged with entering the Capitol and disorderly conduct. The case is still ongoing. And Joshua Knowles and Marsha Murphy arrested for allegedly violating D.C. curfew and trespassing on federal property. Of the dozen people that you just saw, only 3 cases have been closed. 7 are pending. 2 others are unknown. Lupita Murillo, News for Tucson.
Thank you, Lupita. The National Election Crisis Task Force held a meeting to discuss the country's readiness to prevent and respond to a future election crisis. Now, one of the members expressed his concerns for the 2022 and 2024 elections.
I mean, one thing is clear to me that the U.S. federal government now, and I think a lot of state and local governments, are aware of the idea of extremist threats, including violent threats. And they've identified that as the number one terrorist challenge we face these days. So there is now the beginning of preparing and avoiding the kind of issue we saw on January 6th of last year, when basically we were woefully unprepared for what turned out to be a very, very close run thing.
And in Phoenix, a candlelight vigil will be held tonight, marking the anniversary of the attack at the Capitol. The vigil is to both assure everyone that there is peace at the polls and a defense of American democracy. There's also a vigil scheduled here in Tucson at the Reed Park Zoo. We'll have much more on that coming up tonight at 10. And new today, former press secretary for President Trump is leading a charge against him. Stephanie Grisham says former officials like herself are meeting next week. News 4 Tucson's Robbie Reynolds explains.
Stephanie Grisham was former President Donald Trump's press secretary for around 10 months, and then later the chief of staff for Melania Trump, the former first lady. This morning, though, she spoke to CNN, saying that a group of former Trump staff members will meet next week to discuss ways to, quote, stop him. She didn't give specific names, but says the group is roughly 15 people. That interview comes after a report that Grisham met with the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th riot last night.
I think that there were a few of us who, again, have been sitting back watching him continue to manipulate and spread this big lie and continue to harm our country, and started some informal chats, and then just started throwing around ideas of what we could do, how we could formalize it.
Grisham was also unspecific about exactly what this group is going to do, but did say that she did want to travel the country and talk to people who support the former president. Robbie Reynolds, News 4 Tucson.
Grisham resigned the day of the Capitol riot. Former President Donald Trump has not formally responded to her comments. Meanwhile, current President Joe Biden marked the anniversary of the deadly January 6th attack with a forceful speech taking aim at former President Donald Trump's involvement in the riot and warned of the ongoing threats to democracy.
What did we not see? We didn't see a former president who had just rallied the mob to attack, sitting in the private dining room off the Oval Office in the White House, watching it all on television and doing nothing for hours as police were assaulted, lives at risk, the nation's capital under siege.
And Vice President Kamala Harris also delivered a sharp rebuke of Trump and his supporters who attacked the Capitol last year, debunking the lies spread about the 2020 election.